In our final video in the Parts and Functions of Cellular Organelles series, we're going to take a look at the cell's more specialized organelles that really need an individual look in order to talk about their function, starting with an organelle that you've already been introduced to, that being the cell's ribosomes, which are, of course, very important because they produce all of the proteins that are necessary not just for inside the cell, but also outside the cell. So ribosomes are quite small compared to other organelles, as evidenced by the fact that they appear as little dots on the rough endoplasmic reticulum, but if we zoom in, they are actually incredibly complicated structures because the production of protein is a relatively complicated process that you will study in future years in biology. Now, because of how critical proteins are for all cells, ribosomes are really the only organelles that are found in both prokaryotic cells such as bacteria and also eukaryotic cells such as plants and animals, because once again, every single living thing requires proteins in order to function properly. Now, the ribosomes that you've been introduced to are the ones that are located on the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and these ribosomes, as we've mentioned previously, are the ones that primarily produce export proteins, meaning proteins that have function outside of the cell. However, in this cellular diagram here, we can see that there are actually individual ribosomes that are floating around in the cell's cytoplasm, and these are the ribosomes that are used to produce the proteins that are actually used within the cell because they are not tied to the cell's endomembrane system and therefore are not necessary for the purpose of exporting these proteins. Now, the next organelle we're going to talk about is something of a meme on its own. When people think of individualized knowledge in biology, most of the time they think of organelles that we call mitochondria, which are, as the meme suggests, the powerhouse of the cell. So, mitochondria, which is actually the plural form of the word, so when we look at multiple of these organelles, we would use the word mitochondria, and the singular form is actually pronounced mitochondrion. So this here is actually one mitochondrion. And these, as mentioned, produce most of the power that is required for the more complicated processes in the cell. Now, again, we often think of the mitochondria as the cell's power plants, but a better way of describing these is more like the cell's battery, because the cell's power is not electrical in nature. It exists as chemical energy in the form of a chemical called ATP, which you will learn about in future years. Now, the chemical reaction that is facilitated by your cell's mitochondria is arguably the most important chemical reaction that exists on Earth, which is the process of cellular respiration. Now, respiration is a word that we associate with breathing because cellular respiration involves gas exchange. So the classic way that we represent cellular respiration is we take the primary energy source of the body, which of course is a sugar molecule with the chemical C6H12O6, and of course, when we breathe, the gas that we need is oxygen, because this chemical reaction, cellular respiration, cannot occur without oxygen present, and the mitochondria break down this sugar molecule so that we only have carbon dioxide and water left over. But of course, the energy that is stored within this sugar is removed and would be stored in the form of ATP, which can then be used by various chemical reactions that are present within the cell. Now, because of how critical mitochondria are in order to provide the amount of chemical power that is needed, mitochondria are actually found in all eukaryotic cells, which also includes plants, and we'll talk about why that is when we look at the companion organelle that is only found in plants, which are what we call the chloroplasts. And chloroplasts are a specialized organelle whose job it is to capture energy from sunlight. And when people say that life could not exist without plants, what they actually mean is that life could not exist on Earth without chloroplasts, because what chloroplasts do is that they are the central location that occurs in plant cells that perform the most. So when we say cellular respiration is one of the most critical chemical reaction for all organic life on Earth is the reaction done by chloroplasts, which is what we call photosynthesis. And in photosynthesis, the chloroplasts, of course, capture the energy from the sun's light, while at the same time they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water from the soil and use the energy from sunlight and the materials from carbon dioxide and water in order to produce the same sugar molecule that is used in mitochondria for the purpose of producing energy. And that's where this sugar molecule originally came from. Without photosynthesis, there would be no way for any organic life to be able to produce enough energy to survive, but also for any organism that requires oxygen, this is also where the oxygen that is produced in our atmosphere comes from. And you can notice the reason why we talk about mitochondria and chloroplasts together is that cellular respiration and photosynthesis are the same chemical reaction, just happening in the opposite direction. Now, even though plants are able to make their own sugar for the purpose of energy, plants still need mitochondria in order to break down the sugar molecule for the purpose of energy, and also because sunlight is not active all the time. So plants need to use the sugar that they produce during the daytime in order to produce energy whenever there is no sunlight, such as at nighttime. And this is why all eukaryotic cells require mitochondria, because even plants require it to break down the sugar that they capture through photosynthesis in order to produce energy when the sun is no longer available. And that is the complex interrelationship between the powerhouse of the cell, mitochondria, and the important organelle that captures energy from the sun and converts it into a usable form for all organic life on Earth. In the final video in this series, or part 2 of this video, we're going to take a look at the structural support network that exists behind the scenes in every cell that literally holds the cell together, and how more complicated forms of this structure can be used to help cells move.